Yo, what's going on YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte, and today we are taking a look at the New York Islanders as, they made a pretty massive trade the other day that kind of caught me off guard. I actually had two videos basically that were set to go out earlier this week on, basically a trade deadline predictions video where I had Bo Horvat going to the Golden Knights. Yeah, that didn't age well. And the Islanders in their situation, whether it was Tarasenko they were looking at, Tarasenko was the big one. They were also talking about maybe Max Domi in Chicago, and all of a sudden Bo Horvat is traded to the Islanders, and that is kudos to Lou Lamoriello. We know what he does. He is we heard some links a couple of weeks ago that Bo Horvat might have been tied to the Islanders, and all of a sudden things got very eerily quiet on that front, and that's because Lou Lamoriello has this little magic spell he puts on all of his little minions below him to not say a word, and that's what happened. So the Islanders traded Anthony Beauvillier, R2 Ratu, and their first-round pick, which is conditional. It's a conditional draft pick, so the Islanders do still have a little bit of value here in a situation where they have a little leverage if they want to make a move here. They still might not be done. Now, this completely changes what I thought the Islanders should do at the deadline. So now I have to update that because now that they've gone out and got Bo Horvat, that has completely changed the tide for the Islanders. The Islanders are saying to themselves, we are 2 points out of a playoff spot, despite the fact the three teams in front of us have at least 2 or 3 games in hand on us. We still see ourselves as a playoff team. So trading Varley, I would say out of the question. Trading Mayfield, out of the question. Even trading guys like Zach Parise and Hudson Fasching and all of that, it's not going to happen. The Islanders are going to stick with the rentals that they have. There's no sense now that the Islanders will move on from those guys because now they've bought at the deadline. They are buyers, and if they are to make another move here, it is going to be to add to this team that's already there. And there's a couple of assets that the Islanders could potentially add here. Don't think that the Islanders are necessarily done. Now, for the most part, I do think the Islanders are done. But there is still the possibility that when you make a massive trade like that, bringing in Bo Horvat, the Islanders have to make sure they keep themselves in the arms race that will be the Eastern Conference. Listen, the Islanders have done enough now to probably put themselves in the contention status with Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Florida, Washington, and the New York Rangers. But don't think for a second that they are necessarily safe, because what happens when those teams add, right? What happens when those teams add? Like the Devils, maybe they bring in a Timo Meier. Maybe the Buffalo Sabres bring in help in goaltending and Thatcher Demko. Now all of a sudden things are a little bit less comfortable for the Islanders, so they have to be able to continue to add. So I think that brings up the question, well, who could they realistically add that's not going to cost an arm and a leg, that isn't going to do too much damage to their salary? What can they do here? So there's a couple of little things they can do here. So the first thing I'm looking at for the Islanders, well, their cap situation is not necessarily great. They have $2.5 million in cap space. So they do have a little bit to work with here. Trading out Beauvillier's contract really did help them here. Plus Vancouver retaining 25%. You still have to look at the fact here, there is a really important thing that the Islanders have to fix, and that is the depth on the blue line. Because Pella coming back was huge for this team, and Noah Dobson being day-to-day is very encouraging. He is expected to be back in the lineup here relatively soon, if not even playing that first game against Philly when they return from the All-Star break. But there is a obvious need for some help there. Sebastian Aho and Parker Weatherspoon have done a nice job in the interim, but I wouldn't be sold on that going into the postseason. And listen, shout out to Samuel Bolduc. The one game I've seen from him in person, very impressive. He is a physical force. He's a big body and a guy that the Islanders should not be trading for any reason. He's got 26 points in 40 games as a defenseman, and he brings the physical presence when he came up to the Islanders in his 4 games. Really excited to see what Bolduc does in the NHL long-term for the Islanders. So, again, this is more of a rental option, which leads us to a guy that the Islanders are probably familiar with when they played the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and that is Luke Schenn of the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I don't know if the Islanders will do business again with Patrick Allvin and the Canucks here ahead of the deadline. It doesn't really suit the interest here of the Canucks to be trading with the Islanders because, again, you don't necessarily, again, you want the Islanders to maybe miss the playoffs here and get that 13, 14, or 15 spot where the Canucks can select with that pick. That's the one of the ideal situations here for the Canucks. With that said, there is some interest in maybe bringing in a guy like Luke Schenn. That would be an interesting asset for them. And any assets that they didn't get from the Islanders in the Horvat deal, maybe they could try and explore in that deal. But I think that's very unrealistic at this point. But Luke Schenn, maybe that type of defenseman, right? Maybe not that necessarily player in particular, but that type of defenseman. Now, I think a Joel Edmondson in Montreal would be really nice, but I think the price will be too high for Edmondson to the Islanders. I think they're going to look for a first-round pick for him, and the Islanders don't have that asset. That has already been traded. So the Islanders are going to have to be creative, and they're going to have to find a way to maybe throw in, as much as this painfully hurts, trading a guy like Bodie Wild, because I don't think Bodie Wild will want to re-sign with the Islanders this offseason. I think it's one of those things where he said, listen, I've had enough of this whole vaccine situation. I've already made a video about that, and if you want to go check that out, but I hesitate to even talk about that because my channel got a really bad dip after that video. So whatever the case is with Bodie Wild, they need to figure that out, and maybe it's indeed trading him. So that's something to look at. So maybe adding a nice depth veteran defenseman. Up front, I don't think they're done with that either. No discredit to Hudson Fasching and some of the other guys like Simon Holmstrom, either on the top line or in that fourth line role. I would like to see the Islanders add a little bit more scoring to that, because as good as a player as Horvat is to the power play and your first line, honestly, there is still holes on this team. Like, their bottom six cannot score. I love that third line of Pajot, Pajot, Holmstrom, and I'm trying to think of the third guy on that line. But it's not scoring. There's not enough of a scoring threat there, and God forbid the fourth line ever scored a goal with Cizikas, Clutterbuck, and Martin. Like, they're not scoring goals. So the Islanders have to figure that out. I hate to say it, I wouldn't be surprised if we even saw a Ross Johnston trade just to move that $1 million and find a way to bring in a rental. Whether that ends up being like a Max Domi in Chicago or an Ivan Barbashev in St. Louis, that's going to be expensive because he's a very good young player, but that's someone to look at as well. Maybe they don't end up taking, Tarasenko, who's the Blues prize guy, or O'Reilly, but maybe a lesser name, right? Like a Barbashev. That's something to look at. I think the Islanders really got to be careful with trading these prospects, though, because I think the salary is going to be kind of going to catch up to them here at some point. It's, when you've got the suit on, the suit looks good, and then you kind of choke yourself out with the collar and the tie. That's what the Islanders are going to start to do here, because in the best case scenario, they re-sign Bo Horvat. He's going to be expensive. They have to re-sign Ilya Sorokin next summer. That's going to be really important. Oliver Wahlstrom also has to be re-signed this summer. So the Islanders very quickly, they're going to need to be creative and rely on some of those younger players that they have here over the next couple of years to take on the roles of some of the guys that they're letting go. So I expect Zach Parise to not be here next season. Simon Holmstrom will probably take his spot on the roster. In terms of some other guys, Bo Horvat, you really need to re-sign Bo Horvat. Like, that is like alarm bells going off for me. Oliver Wahlstrom, you got to keep him long term. That's a really important one to keep. Hudson Fasching could give or take. I would like to see Otto Koivula come up next season, and I think he's a guy that can jump into the bottom six. Blade Jenkins, same thing. Reese Newkirk, Ruslan Ishikov, William Dufour. We've seen all of these guys before. They're going to have more of a role on this team. Arno Durando, it's like I've been talking about those guys forever, but those are the guys in Bridgeport that you're going to need that can come up in a pinch as some depth. And as scary as that is, that those guys need to develop at this point for the Islanders. If not, cut bait with them next season, because a lot of their contracts end after next season. On the blue line, I'm actually a lot more optimistic, especially with Samuel Bolduc there and how good he has looked. Kale Odelius is a very good prospect for the Islanders. He's kind of come into his own. The Islanders, this is a guy that was a second-round pick in 2022, and in Djurgårdens of the SHL, he's actually played quite well. And this is a guy that, again, his numbers aren't super sexy, but this is a guy that is still 18 years old and a guy that you have to develop. This is not a guy that's just going to come right into the NHL. It might end up being like a Samuel Bolduc, where all of a sudden at 22 years old, after 2 or 3 years, looks like a really good prospect. Scott Mayfield is a UFA this summer. I don't care if he even takes a deal for $1 million, I don't care. Let him go. He's not gonna take that deal. Let's be honest. Realistically, he's gonna get a decent number, probably from a Western Conference team, and I'm looking specifically at the St. Louis Blues. Thank you, St. Louis Blues, because you're gonna alleviate the Islanders of that Scott Mayfield contract, bring up Samuel Bolduc, and I'll be fine with that. With that said, I do still think there's a need for another defenseman next season. Even with Samuel Bolduc coming up next year, I'm not a huge fan of Aho long term. Even Parker Witherspoon, I think the Islanders will cut bait with him this summer. The Islanders really need to get some more depth defensively. As things look decent right now, going into next year, if you really want to be a legit playoff team, you got to add more to that. And even if they add a rental this year, we know Lamoriello likes to keep guys long term, but there's no guarantees there. So that's what you're looking at here. If the Islanders do go the route of adding somebody, it is going to have to be someone that is going to be, at least it's got to make sense to keep them long term, right? And that's kind of Lou Lamoriello's style of things. And he's a guy that, listen, the fact he made this move for Bo Horvat, he's a guy that says, listen, I will not trade for guys unless I think we can win a Stanley Cup. So Lou Lamoriello thinks this team can win a Stanley Cup. He does. He would not make this trade if he didn't think so. And the reason that is recently Elliot Friedman had talked to Lou Lamoriello in the past in his time in New Jersey, and he said that, I'm not a guy that's going to make moves at the deadline if I don't think our team is capable of winning a Stanley Cup. It's not enough to win a playoff round or two, and that might end up being what happens to the Islanders. But you're going into the playoffs with the mindset that we can win a Stanley Cup. And is that fool's gold, looking back at what happened to the Islanders in 2020 and 2021 against that juggernaut of the Tampa Bay Lightning? Because let's be honest, that Islanders team, we have not seen that team since 2021 in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals, of the Eastern Conference Finals, in the last game at Nassau Coliseum. It seems like since the Islanders have left that Coliseum environment, they have not been that same team. Let's be honest. Last year, they were not great at all. And this year, there's been glimpses of that success earlier this season. The Calgary comeback, the Rangers comeback. I was able to go to both of those games. The Colorado Avalanche 5-goal explosion. That there is glimpses of that to this team. They just haven't been able to do it fully for a long enough period for anybody to be truly confident. And I'm going to end this video with a fun fact. So an interesting fact here with Bo Horvat. Believe it or not, Lou Lamoriello actually traded out Bo Horvat. You may be saying to yourself, what are you talking about? Back in the day, when Lou Lamoriello was the general manager of the New Jersey Devils, the Devils traded their top 10 draft pick to the Vancouver Canucks in order to acquire goaltender Corey Schneider. Corey Schneider ended up going the other way to the New Jersey Devils and was a very good asset at the time for the Devils. Didn't really work out long term, but was a good asset for the first little while in New Jersey. And what ended up going the other way was a first-round pick and a couple of assets. Well, that top 10 draft pick that the Devils had traded to Vancouver ended up becoming Bo Horvat. So in an alternate universe, the New Jersey Devils would have had Bo Horvat, but Lou Lamoriello had traded Bo Horvat away. Kind of an interesting thing there, huh? Kind of interesting to think of an alternate universe where that happened, but that's what we're looking at. So now things have kind of come full circle, right? Bo Horvat ended up getting drafted in the top 10 by the Canucks, and now, years later, Lou Lamoriello ends up trading for Bo Horvat. So I kind of figured I'd throw that to you guys because I don't think that information has gotten out there all that much, and it's something that I wanted to share with you guys at the end of today's video. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what we're doing here at Goal Line Hockey and want to see the latest news around the NHL, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and an even bigger subscribe down below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and let's go Islanders.